Hi guys, it's time for the tone curve tutorial. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible and put it in terms that you can, use and apply on your own images today. I've watched a couple of YouTube tutorials throughout the years on the tone curve, and they almost just get too in depth, and some of the features you probably will never use. So I'm going to try to just skip over those features and just give you the ones that you will use. Okay, so here's our tone curve. I chose this image by Sarah Hadaji because one, it's beautiful, and two, it is really low contrast. I like low contrast images. I like a soft edit, but that's not everyone's taste. So I'm going to show you how to get contrast in the tone curve. And that is what the tone curve is primarily used for, is adding contrast. And it's a lot better than the contrast slider for a couple of reasons. One, it just ends up looking more professional. And two, it gives you a lot more control. You can really pinpoint, deepening just the shadows or the midtones, and there really isn't, you do have a shadow slider, and you do have a black slider, and you do have a contrast slider and highlights, but you really don't have a mid-tone slider, okay? But that you do have control of it in the tone curve, so I'm going to show you. Okay, so to start out, just the real basics. First of all, we are in the point curve. There is, if you come down to this first one, this is the parametric curve, and this is where you can just adjust your highlights, like lights, darks, and shadows on the sliders, and that one's a little bit more simple, but you don't have the same control. So my dog is bothering me. If you hear them bark, I have 3 dogs, and they always want my attention. So anyway, okay, so here's the basics. This bottom left corner here represents your black point. The top right corner represents your white point, and everything in between. Okay, so obviously we're on a grid here, and what we're going to do to start is just take this image and add contrast. Okay, so here, if we put a point here, oops, right on that, if you double click, you can take away your point. So that was a good little mistake to demonstrate that. But if you click right on that intersection there, that's your shadow point, okay? If you click on this intersection, that's your midpoint. And if you click up here, this is your highlight point, okay? So what we're going to do to start is create an S curve. It's called an S curve because it looks like an S, and it is the most used way to create contrast in an image. So what you're going to do is start by darkening your darks here, okay? Just pull that down. If you pulled that up, that would lighten your darks. But we're creating contrast, so we're going to pull that down. Now we're going to pull up our midpoint, and we're going to pull up our highlights a little bit too. And we've created sort of an S. If you want to take it a step further, you can take your white point and pull it down a little bit. And you can take your black point and pull it up a little bit. And there's your S. When you pull this black point up, okay, the further up you get, look at the blacks, they're turning gray. So this is true black. Anything up here is getting grayer and grayer and grayer. And that's obviously a stylistic choice. I actually they call this crushing the shadows. So when you pull that up, that's crushed shadows. And it's sort of a filmic look. A lot of people like it. When you pull your white point down, same thing, you're crushing your whites. And that sort of creates a milky, soft, milky look in the highlights. So there we go. We've created contrast in the tone curve just by adjusting our points. And I'll show you before and after. See what a difference that made? Now I want to show you what this would look like with just the contrast adjusted so that you can see the difference. So let's reset it and take our contrast up. Pretty similar because it's an S curve. But let's say that I wanted darker darks or darker shadows than, this contrast is giving me. Because what the contrast slider does is it brightens the whites at the same time it's darkening the darks. So you can't just pinpoint the darks. You can't just pinpoint the lights. It's doing it all, in the same portions, I guess is the way to put it. So let's put that back, and let's say that we'll put our 3 points. And let's say that I want to make the darks darker than, I really don't want to touch the lights. I just want to darken these darks. What I can do is I could just do this, and that is darkening the darks. But look at this line. It's also pulling my midpoint or my midtones down some. There's a way you can focus more on any one of them, but we'll say focus more on the shadows. I'm going to create anchor points, okay? So just kind of follow along here, but I'm going to put one here and one here. Now those are my anchors. Now watch what happens. Only that area moves because I've anchored it. And that's a really good way to, just work on the areas you want to. So let's do that. Let's darken our darks, and let's say I just want to brighten the highlights, okay? I don't want to touch the midtones. How would I do that? I am going to, here's my highlight. Oopsie. You can double click to take that back. Here's my highlights, but I don't want to affect the midtones. So how can I do that? If I do this, look at my midtones are coming up. So let me put that back. I'm going to put my point back, and then I'm going to create an anchor up here. So I'm just affecting my highlights. And that's really, oops, I took it a little too far. Yep, if you just pull it up gently, you're really only affecting, certain areas. But just remember your anchor points if you really want to get specific with what you're adjusting. So that's the basics of it. Really simple. I mean, probably a lot simpler than people imagine if you haven't used it. But let me show you a practical application. So let's just put O2 on this. Okay. And now, let's say I want my whites to be true white and I want my blacks to be true black. If I want my blacks to be true, I'm just going to pull that little point down, okay? And that made my blacks actual black. And I want my whites to be true white instead of a milky white. So I'm going to pull that up. And then I'm going to pull this up to match too. Kind of something to keep in mind as you're working on the tone curve is it should sort of flow. You know what I mean? Like if you start getting into, this kind of weird stuff, and if the tone curve is looking really jagged, it probably isn't good. I mean, look at that. It's not good. I was right. So kind of keep it flowing. But yeah, let's do that. Let's make our blacks true black, our whites true white. But then we don't have any contrast. So this is O2. This is the tone curve after I've made a couple of adjustments. We'll bring down our shadows a little bit. I'm going to actually get rid of this point and move it up to midtones so that I can focus more on the overall brightness. I'm going to brighten that up a little. And I like it right there. But if we want to play a little more, I could pull up our highlights a little bit more. I could even pull this up a little. I mean, sometimes you just, don't be afraid to come down here and just sort of, if you think, I want my overall tones to be a little bit brighter, that's going to be in the middle. And don't be afraid to just play. I mean, if you end up with something crazy, come up to edit, undo. That's all you have to do. But if you give yourself an hour, a solid hour to play with this, you are going to learn so much just by doing it and having the basics down. You've got your blacks, your whites, your shadows, midtones, and highlights. And you can do so much with this. And nothing is permanent in editing. If you don't like it, you don't have to mess with trying to get it back to where it was. Just click undo, Okay, so I do want to show you the parametric curve too, because I think there's some cool things you can do. So let me put this back on O2. Actually, I'm going to use a different image because this one is very low contrast. I'm going to use this one. I've already edited that, but let's reset it. Yeah, I want to show you how you can use both the point curve and the parametric curve together to really define a style that is only yours, that's really specific to you. And it requires, some playing, but you can really get in depth. So here's our O2 tone curve. I'm going to pull this up a little bit. And what I want to do is just focus on muting the whites. So I'm going to put an anchor point here so that I don't affect too much of the highlights. I just want to mute my whites. So I'm pulling those down. Now I'm going to go to the parametric curve, okay? And I have a whole other set of tools here that are not connected to the point curve. These two are not connected. So I muted my whites in the point curve. And now let's see how I can further adjust them in the parametric curve. I could pull them all the way down to really mute them, or I could pull them all the way up, and now I have bright whites and muted whites. So, you can get really creative with these. Same thing with the shadows. If you want to really deepen your shadows, and then you can come over here and adjust them here too, in your darks and your shadows. I mean, this is all layering. The more you layer and edit, the more it's going to look like something you did, not just something that you put a preset on. You know what I mean? And I don't think there's anything wrong with just putting a preset on something. I really don't. Sometimes, gosh, we're all busy, right? Probably a lot of us have kids. A lot of us have second jobs. A lot of us aren't lucky enough to just be full-time photographers. So sometimes you just have to get it done, and it's important to have good tools to do it. But, if you do have the time to play, I think it's a great thing to do. Yeah, and you also have a lot of leeway down here with these. When I used to use small, let me show you what I would do, because I think this will help prove my point. Does anyone else, by the way, have some of their presets load to user presets instead of like the actual name of the presets? Like Small did that for me. Biba did that for me. I don't know why, but anyway. So let me show you what I used to do when I used Small. Way, 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 way back in the day. Probably like right after Small was released. Okay. I would, before I touched anything else, I would come down here and lighten my darks and even lighten my shadows depending on the, depending on the image. And then I would come up here and adjust my contrast and exposure and everything else. But that's how powerful, the tone curve is that was the first thing I would do, especially if an image was underexposed. So let's just pretend here, and I'll pull this exposure down. And I will apply Small, and let's just pretend that's the way it was shot. Before I even adjusted anything else, I would come down here and give myself a little head start. And I thought that worked really well in conjunction with Small. Obviously, yeah, I don't do that anymore because I don't use it, but that is just an example of, I think, how powerful it is. So let's do another one and just play around a little bit with it. Okay, again, I already edited these because they're so beautiful, and I just wanted to play. Oh, that is such a beautiful photo that I literally thought that was already edited. Okay, let's put O2 on it because these are just, gosh, my computer is so slow. It's like time for a new one. I just have the hardest time getting rid of things if they're working. Like, clearly this is not working well, but it's working, so I'm putting off buying a new one. If you guys have suggestions on computers, please send them my way. I need one badly. I wouldn't mind a laptop, but I don't know. I'd probably rather stick with PC. Anyway, let's put O2 on this, and here we are in our parametric curve. There's really not much I want to do with the highlights, but let's go to the point curve and see what we can do. I know that a lot of RNO users are doing this. They're bringing up their white point, and they're adjusting their highlights back up to, just the line there. Let's see. And don't be afraid to take these points off and place your own points. So, let's take these 2 points off, and let's put one right in the middle. And now we can just brighten that overall image. And look at how little I moved that. This is really a sensitive tool. I'm going to lift that up. I'm going to make some anchor points here and just deepen my shadows. And then, because I already have this anchor point, I can just focus on giving it a filmy look in the darkest areas. And I really do love crushed highlights in white, so I would probably do that too. But, that's not the best edit in the world, but just to play and just kind of show you what you can do. It is actually a really pretty edit. I know that these don't translate really well on a screen recording, but you know, it's better than nothing. Like, I think it gives you the idea. So those are really the basics of the tone curve. I think it's a lot easier than it sounds. It does look intimidating, especially with all those little points. It looks like it would be confusing, but as long as you remember that your blacks are down here, your whites are up here, and everything in the middle is, you know, your range of tones. So you've got your shadows, your midpoints, and your highlights. And, you know, look at all that leeway you have. And don't forget your anchor points. If you really want to zone in on just the midtones, you know, make your anchor points and do that. Oh, here's the other thing I wanted to show you. So there's this little button up here that you can push, okay? And you can hover over any point in the image and look at the tone curve. It's showing you exactly where you're hovering over, where it corresponds on the curve. So let's pretend that I want to deepen up his suit, which I probably wouldn't. But see where I'm hovering there? And it's showing me on the tone curve where I can pinpoint it. So we'll click there. If you click it, it actually places a point for you. So if I pull this down, what do you think is going to happen? This whole thing is going to come with it. So let me make an anchor point and pull that down just a little bit. Yes. Now that deepened that up really well. Let's try it with something else. Let's see over here. These are the midtones, I would guess. Midtones and highlights. Yep. So I'm going to click there, and it's made another point for me. If you get your points too close, you don't want to do that. So you can double click and erase the other one. But now I can adjust just that area. See that? Yeah. You know, this may not be the most practical use or practical tool to use, but there could be, you know, an instance where you want to use it, and it's just good to know that it's there. The last thing I kind of want to mention that you probably will never use, but is also cool to know, is that you have your RGB channels up here too. And that just means you've got, you know, your reds and your greens and your pinks, and your blues and your yellows. So you can make S curves in here too to give it more contrast in the color. So there's contrast in terms of light and dark, and then there's contrast in terms of color, and this is where you can create that and adjust your tones. Let me just show you for example. So let's say you have an image that you cannot get the white balance right on, and let's say your image is way too pink and the tint slider is just not cutting it for you. You can put a point in the midtone here. And this thing is even more sensitive than the point curve in terms of like how little you have to move it to get a result. But now watch the image and look at that. It's just adding in that green. And then if you pull it the other way, it's adding in that pink. And you can also do your anchor points to zone in on whatever you want to change the hue of. So if I've pinpointed my midtones here, and say I want to add a little bit more green into just the midtones. You can see, like, look over here. You can see where, I mean, obviously it doesn't look great, but it's demonstrating what you can do. But these are very sensitive, so just do it a little bit. Another thing you can do here is take that same little button and, you know, click, like, look at, it's hovering right there. Her skin tone is right there. So that's where I would adjust my point up and down to zone in on her skin. And you can do that with blue and yellow, and you can do it with red and cyan too. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I don't think there's a whole lot of practical uses for it, but you could really get creative with it. I think if you have like an hour or two to just sit down and, you know, experiment with the tone curve, you probably will find it to be a really useful tool. Yeah, I kind of think that's it. I mean, you know, as long as you just remember the very basics and remember your anchor points and, you know, how much control you have with this, I think it'll be really useful. So let me know, please, if this was helpful in any way. And also let me know if you have any questions, like if you were following along and something didn't make sense, or, if you just have a general question about something I said. I'm always here to answer. Most of the time, I'm just sitting here editing either client photos or, your photos or whatever. So I'm always happy to take a break and interact with human beings. So never hesitate. But yeah, I think that's it. That's like the real basics of the tone curve. And I hope you guys had an amazing Monday. And tomorrow is not Monday anymore. Oh, wait. It's not Monday in Australia, and it's not Monday in Asia. So for anybody for whom it is Monday, it's almost over. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.